a bride for the ruthless boss. Alessandra Romano had spent her life believing she could choose her future. But when her family betrayed Dario Benedetti, her choices disappeared. Now she was his bride, his property. He ran a slow hand over the curve of her hip, his voice dark with amusement. "You don't have to love me, Dulcezza," he murmured. "You just have to obey." Chapter 1. The Weight of Unwanted Promises. The scent of lilies, heavy and cloying, filled the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within Alessandra. She smoothed a hand over the ivory silk of her wedding gown, the exquisite fabric feeling foreign against her skin. It was a masterpiece, a creation of renowned designer Lorenzo Ferragamo, but to Alessandra, it felt like a shroud. Each delicate stitch, each shimmering pearl, represented a chain binding her to a life she never wanted. Outside, the late afternoon Roman sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Villa Medici, where her wedding reception was being held. The laughter and celebratory chatter of the guests were a muffled drone, a world away from the suffocating silence of her bridal suite. She glanced at her reflection in the antique mirror, the ornate gold frame a symbol of the opulence that surrounded her and the gilded cage it had become. Her dark eyes, usually sparkling with life, were shadowed with a profound sadness. Her high cheekbones, a testament to her Roman heritage, were more pronounced, her full lips pressed into a thin, resolute line. The elaborate updo, adorned with delicate white flowers, felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the burden she now carried. Alessandra was 57, a woman who had always prided herself on her independence. A successful art restorer, she had spent her life breathing life back into forgotten masterpieces, meticulously peeling back layers of time to reveal the beauty beneath. Now, she felt like one of those paintings, her own life obscured by the heavy hand of family obligation. Her family, the Romanos, once a respected name in Roman society, now teetering on the precipice of ruin, all thanks to her brother, Marco's reckless dealings. He had gambled away their fortune, their reputation, and ultimately, Alessandra's freedom. He had borrowed heavily from Dario Benedetti, the capo of the powerful Benedetti family, a man known for his ruthless efficiency and unwavering control. A man who always collected his debts. Dario. The name itself sent a shiver down her spine. She had only met him a handful of times, each encounter leaving her with a sense of unease, a prickling awareness of the dangerous power he wielded. He was a man of striking contrasts, tall and powerfully built, with a face that could have been sculpted from marble, a strong jaw, a straight, aristocratic nose, and eyes the color of polished obsidian. Eyes that seemed to see straight through her, stripping away her defenses, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, only added to his aura of commanding authority. He moved with a quiet grace, a predator confident in his dominion. The arrangement, as her father had euphemistically called it, was simple. Alessandra would marry Dario, and Marco's debt would be erased. Her family's honor, or what remained of it, would be salvaged. Her own desires, her own life, were irrelevant. She remembered the meeting in her father's study, the heavy scent of old leather and despair hanging in the air. Her father, a man who had always seemed invincible, looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with a shame that mirrored her own. Marco, ever the charmer, had tried to justify his actions, his words hollow and unconvincing. Dario had simply watched, his expression unreadable, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards, a man who knew he had won. "It's for the best, Alessandra," her father had said, his voice raspy with emotion. "Dario is a powerful man. He can protect us." Protect them? Or control them? Alessandra had wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but she had remained silent. Years of ingrained obedience, of prioritizing family above all else, had stifled her voice. She had tried to reason with them, to offer alternatives. She could sell her apartment, her art collection, anything to repay the debt. But Dario hadn't wanted money. He wanted her. A Romano bride, a symbol of his victory, a tangible representation of his power. A knock on the door startled her. It was Sophia, her cousin and closest confidant, her face etched with concern. "Alessandra? Are you all right? They're waiting for you." Alessandra forced a smile, a brittle mask that barely concealed her turmoil.
"I'm fine, Sophia."
Just gathering my thoughts. Sophia stepped into the room, her eyes taking in the scene, the tension radiating from Alessandra like a palpable force. She was a woman of warmth and practicality, her presence a comforting anchor in Alessandra's storm-tossed world. "He's not a monster, you know," Sophia said softly, her voice laced with a hint of uncertainty. "Dario, he can be surprisingly kind. Beneath the exterior." Alessandra gave a short, humorless laugh. "Kind? He's a mafioso, Sophia. He buys and sells people like commodities. And I'm his latest acquisition." Sophia winced. "It's not like that, Alessandra. He respects you. I've seen it. He admires your strength." Alessandra turned away, gazing out the window at the sprawling gardens below. "He admires my family name, my connections, my usefulness." "Maybe," Sophia conceded. "But there's something else. I saw the way he looked at you during the negotiations. It wasn't just about business." Alessandra didn't reply. She didn't want to think about Dario's gaze, the intensity that had both terrified and, disturbingly, intrigued her. She didn't want to acknowledge the flicker of something she couldn't name that had sparked within her when their eyes had met. It was a dangerous spark, one she needed to extinguish before it consumed her. Another knock, more insistent this time. It was her father. "Alessandra, it's time." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. She was Alessandra Romano, and she would face this with dignity, with grace, even if it killed her. She would not let them see her break. She would not give Dario Benedetti the satisfaction. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and opened the door, stepping out into the blinding light of her new, unwanted reality. The weight of her family's expectations and the unknown future with a man she both feared and felt inexplicably drawn to settled heavily upon her. It was a weight she knew she would have to carry, perhaps for the rest of her life. And yet, a tiny, almost imperceptible ember of defiance flickered within her, a refusal to be completely extinguished. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past Unveiled. The murmurs of the crowd rose and fell like the tide as Alessandra walked down the aisle, her father's arm a shaky support. The aisle, a pathway of white rose petals, seemed to stretch endlessly before her, leading her to a future she dreaded. The scent of the roses, mixed with the heavier perfume of the lilies, was almost overwhelming, a fragrant reminder of the gilded cage she was entering. She focused on the intricate patterns of the ancient Roman mosaics that adorned the villa's walls, drawing strength from their enduring beauty. These stones had witnessed centuries of history, of love and loss, of triumphs and tragedies. They were a silent testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, beauty could endure. Her gaze finally reached the altar, where Dario stood waiting. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that accentuated his powerful physique. The afternoon sunlight, streaming through the tall windows, caught the silver in his hair, giving him an almost ethereal aura. But it was his eyes that held her captive. Those dark, intense eyes, now fixed on her with an unwavering gaze, seemed to strip away her carefully constructed facade, leaving her feeling vulnerable and exposed. He offered her a small, almost imperceptible smile, a gesture that did little to ease the knot of anxiety in her stomach. It was a smile that hinted at a hidden depth, a complexity that both intrigued and frightened her. The ceremony itself was a blur. The ancient words of the vows, spoken in Italian, echoed through the vast space, each syllable a binding oath, a promise she hadn't chosen to make. She felt a detachment from the proceedings, as if she were watching herself from afar, a spectator in her own life. When Dario slipped the heavy gold band onto her finger, its weight felt like a shackle. The ring, A Benedetti family heirloom, was a masterpiece of intricate craftsmanship, featuring a large, flawless emerald surrounded by diamonds. It was a symbol of his wealth, his power, and now his ownership of her. The kiss, a brief, perfunctory brush of his lips against hers, sent a surprising jolt of electricity through her. It was a possessive kiss, a claim, a brand. It was a kiss that left her feeling strangely breathless, a disconcerting mix of fear and a flicker of something she couldn't, or wouldn't, name. The reception was a whirlwind of faces, of polite congratulations and veiled curiosity. Alessandra moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, her smile fixed, her responses automatic. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by the expectations of her family and the watchful gaze of her new husband. Dario remained close by her side, his hand possessively resting on the small of her back, a constant reminder of his presence, his control. He was the perfect host, charming and attentive, engaging in conversation with ease, his every move calculated, controlled. He introduced her to his family, a formidable collection of individuals who exuded power and influence. His mother, Isabella, a woman of striking beauty and icy elegance, regarded her with a cool appraisal, her eyes assessing, judging. His younger brother, Lorenzo, was more welcoming, his smile genuine, his eyes filled with a warmth that was absent in the rest of the family. As the evening wore on, Alessandra began to feel the strain. The constant scrutiny, the forced smiles, the weight of the expectations were taking their toll. She longed for escape, for a moment of solitude, a chance to breathe. She found a small, secluded balcony overlooking the gardens. The air was cooler here, a welcome respite from the stifling atmosphere of the reception. She leaned against the stone balustrade, gazing out at the darkening sky. The first stars were beginning to appear, their faint light a reminder of the vastness of the universe, the insignificance of her own troubles. Tired, Dolcezza? Dario's voice, low and resonant, startled her. She hadn't heard him approach. He stood beside her, his presence filling the small space, his scent, a subtle blend of sandalwood and something darker, more primal, enveloping her. She turned to face him, her expression carefully guarded.
It's been a long day.
He studied her for a moment, his eyes searching, probing. You carry yourself with a strength that belies your reluctance. Alessandra met his gaze, her chin lifting slightly. I may not have chosen this, but I will not be broken by it. A flicker of something that might have been admiration crossed his face. I never doubted that. He paused, then added, My family, we have a history, Alessandra. A legacy of blood and loyalty. It's not always pretty. She knew that, of course. The Benedetti name was synonymous with power, with ruthlessness, with a code of honor that was both ancient and unforgiving. She had heard the whispers, the rumors, the stories of their dealings, their vendettas, their unwavering grip on the city's underworld. And what is my place in this legacy? She asked, her voice betraying a hint of bitterness. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. The touch, unexpectedly tender, sent a shiver through her. You are my wife. You are a Benedetti. You will be protected, honored, and obeyed. The last word, spoken softly, held a steel core. It was a reminder of her position, of the power he held over her. And what if I refused to obey? She challenged, her voice barely a whisper. His eyes darkened, the warmth disappearing, replaced by a cold, implacable resolve. You won't. It wasn't a threat, but a statement of fact. A certainty that chilled her to the bone. He stepped closer, his body almost touching hers. I know about your work, Alessandra. Your passion for restoring the past. You see beauty where others see only decay. You bring life back to what was lost. He paused, his gaze holding hers. Perhaps you can do the same for me. His words, unexpected and strangely intimate, hung in the air between them. They were a glimpse into a hidden vulnerability, a suggestion of a past that haunted him, a past he wanted her to heal. It was a request, not a demand, and it stirred something within her, a flicker of empathy, a spark of curiosity. It was also, she realized, a manipulation, a subtle way of drawing her into his world, of binding her to him with more than just a wedding ring. And yet a part of her, the part that had always been drawn to the broken, the damaged, the forgotten, felt a pull, a desire to uncover the secrets hidden beneath his carefully constructed facade. The shadows of his past were calling to her, and she knew, with a growing sense of unease and a strange, unsettling anticipation, that she would not be able to resist their pull. She was trapped, but perhaps, within that trap, there was a possibility of something more, something she hadn't dared to hope for. Chapter 3. A Cage of Gilded Bars. The Palazzo Benedetti was a fortress, a magnificent, imposing structure that dominated its surroundings. Ancient stone walls, thick enough to withstand a siege, enclosed a world of opulent beauty and hidden secrets. Alessandra found herself wandering its vast, echoing halls, feeling more like a prisoner than a mistress. The palazzo was a labyrinth of grand salons, richly decorated with priceless antiques, intricate frescoes, and heavy, velvet drapes that blocked out the Roman sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of the Benedetti family's power and history. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. Suits of armor stood guard in the corners, silent sentinels of a violent past. The air itself felt heavy with the weight of generations, of secrets whispered in the shadows, of deals made in the darkness. The staff, a silent, efficient army of servants, treated her with a deference that bordered on fear. They moved around her like shadows, anticipating her needs before she even voiced them, their eyes averted, their voices hushed. It was a suffocating atmosphere, a constant reminder of her isolation, of her status as an outsider in this tightly knit world. Dario had been surprisingly considerate. He had given her free rein of the palazzo, instructing the staff to cater to her every whim. He had even designated a spacious, sunlit room overlooking the gardens as her studio, providing her with all the materials she could possibly need for her art restoration work. It was a gesture of appeasement, perhaps a way of keeping her occupied, of distracting her from the reality of her situation. But it was also, she suspected, a test. A way of gauging her reaction, of seeing how she would adapt to her new life. He was watching her, always watching her, his dark eyes assessing, calculating, waiting for her to make a mistake, to reveal a weakness. She spent her days exploring the palazzo, trying to find a sense of place, a sense of purpose in this alien environment. She started with the library, a vast, two-story room filled with thousands of leather-bound books, their spines gleaming in the dim light. The scent of old paper and leather was comforting, a familiar haven in this unfamiliar world. She discovered a hidden alcove, a small, cozy space with a window seat overlooking the gardens. It became her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the oppressive atmosphere of the palazzo, lose herself in the pages of a book, and forget, for a few precious moments, that she was a prisoner. She also began to tentatively explore her studio. The room was filled with natural light, the large windows offering a breathtaking view of the meticulously manicured gardens. It was a space designed for creativity, for inspiration, but Alessandra found it difficult to focus. The weight of her new reality, the uncertainty of her future, cast a shadow over her work. She had brought with her a small, unfinished canvas, a portrait of her grandmother, Nonna Emilia. It was a painting she had started months ago, a labor of love, a tribute to the woman who had taught her everything she knew about art, about life, about resilience. She set up the canvas on an easel, her hands trembling slightly. She picked up her brushes, her fingers fumbling with the familiar tools. But the inspiration wouldn't come. The colors seemed dull, the lines lifeless. One evening, Dario found her in the studio, staring at the unfinished canvas, her expression filled with frustration. "It's not working," she said, her voice tight with emotion. I can't seem to find the light." He stood behind her, his presence filling the room. He studied the painting, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "She was a strong woman, your Nonna Emilia." Alessandra nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She taught me everything. He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing against the canvas, tracing the outline of her grandmother's face. You have her eyes, he said softly. The same fire, the same determination. His words, unexpected and surprisingly perceptive, sent a shiver through her. It was the first time he had acknowledged her as a person, as an individual, rather than just a possession. He stepped back, his gaze meeting hers. Don't try to force it, Alessandra. The light will return. You just need to find your way. His words were meant to be encouraging, but they also held a deeper meaning. He was talking about more than just the painting. He was talking about her life, about her future, about the challenges she faced. He left her then, leaving her alone with her thoughts, with her doubts, with the unfinished canvas. But his words, his presence, had lingered, a subtle shift in their dynamic, a hint of a connection that she hadn't expected. It was a dangerous connection, she knew, but she couldn't deny the pull, the fascination, the growing sense of intrigue that he inspired within her. She was still trapped, still a prisoner in his gilded cage, but the bars of that cage seemed a little less impenetrable, the walls a little less daunting. She was beginning to see glimpses of the man beneath the mask, the man behind the title of capo, and those glimpses were both terrifying and strangely compelling. And with that realization, a new fear, far more potent than the one she had been living with, began to take root. It was the fear of losing herself, of becoming absorbed into his world, of surrendering not just her freedom, but her heart. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Palazzo. The days settled into a routine, a strange, unsettling blend of luxury and confinement. Alessandra continued her exploration of the Palazzo, each discovery revealing another layer of the Benedetti family's complex history. She found hidden passages, secret rooms, and forgotten treasures, each object whispering stories of a past filled with both glory and darkness. She began to spend more time in the gardens, finding solace in the tranquility of the meticulously manicured landscape. The gardens were a world unto themselves, a hidden oasis of beauty and serenity within the imposing walls of the palazzo. She discovered a small, secluded rose garden, its fragrant blooms a riot of color and scent. It became her favorite place, a refuge where she could escape the watchful eyes of the staff, the oppressive atmosphere of the house, and the ever-present weight of Dario's presence. She also began to interact more with the staff, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She learned their names, their stories, their fears, and their loyalties. She discovered that beneath their subservient exteriors, they were ordinary people, caught up in a world they didn't fully understand, bound by a code of silence and a fear of reprisal. Maria, the head housekeeper, a woman of quiet dignity and unwavering loyalty to the Benedetti family, became a reluctant confidant. Alessandra sensed a hidden sadness in Maria's eyes, a weariness that spoke of a life lived in the shadows, of secrets witnessed and burdens carried. This house it holds many secrets, Signora, Maria said one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper. They were in the kitchen, Alessandra helping Maria prepare the evening meal, a task that provided a sense of normalcy, a connection to the ordinary world. Alessandra nodded, her hands kneading the dough for the pasta. I can feel it. The walls they seemed to whisper. Maria glanced around nervously, as if afraid of being overheard. There are things that are not spoken of. Things that are best left buried. Alessandra understood. She knew that the Benedetti family's wealth and power were built on a foundation of violence and secrecy. She had heard the rumors, the whispers, the stories of their ruthless dealings, their unwavering grip on the city's underworld. Dario, he carries a heavy burden, Maria continued, her voice filled with a mixture of respect and pity. He inherited the responsibilities at a young age. He had to become what he is. Alessandra sensed that Maria was referring to Dario's father, the previous capo, a man known for his brutality and his unwavering adherence to the family's code of honor. She had heard stories of his reign, of the fear he inspired, of the blood that had been spilled to maintain the Benedetti family's power. He had no choice, Maria added, her eyes meeting Alessandra's. It was his duty.
His destiny.
Alessandra didn't reply. She was beginning to understand the weight of that destiny, the pressure that Dario was under, the expectations he had to fulfill. She was beginning to see him not just as a captor, but as a man trapped by his own legacy, bound by a code he hadn't chosen, a life he hadn't asked for. One evening, she found Dario in the library, standing by the window, gazing out at the darkening city. He was dressed in a dark suit, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired, the lines of strain etched around his eyes, his mouth. He turned as she entered, his expression guarded. "Alessandra, I didn't hear you come in." "I was exploring," she said, her voice hesitant. "I found the secret passage behind the bookcase." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a hint of amusement. "You are resourceful, Dulcezza." She walked towards him, her steps echoing in the vast room. "This place is filled with secrets." He nodded, his gaze returning to the window. "Every family has its secrets, Alessandra. The Benedettis we have more than most." She stood beside him, looking out at the city lights, the twinkling stars a reminder of the vastness of the world beyond the palazzo walls. "Maria told me about your father." He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Maria should know better than to speak of such things." "She cares about you," Alessandra said softly. "She sees the burden you carry." He turned to face her, his eyes searching, probing. "And what do you see, Alessandra?" She met his gaze, her heart beating faster. "I see a man trapped by his past. A man who wants something more." His expression softened, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "And what makes you think I want something more?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Because I see it in your eyes. The same longing that I feel." The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a dangerous attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface since the day they met. It was a connection that defied logic, that transcended their circumstances, that threatened to consume them both. The whispers of the palazzo seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the deafening sound of her own heartbeat. He was a dangerous man, a man who could destroy her, but she was drawn to him, irresistibly, inevitably, like a moth to a flame. And in that moment, she knew that she was playing with fire, a fire that could either warm her or consume her completely. The choice, she realized, was no longer entirely his. It was hers, too. And that realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Chapter 5. The Dance of Defiance and Desire. The unspoken tension between Alessandra and Dario became a palpable presence, a constant undercurrent in their interactions. They circled each other, drawn together by an invisible force, yet held apart by the constraints of their situation, by the weight of their respective pasts. It was a dance of defiance and desire, a delicate balance between resistance and surrender. Alessandra found herself increasingly drawn to Dario, despite her initial fear and resentment. She saw glimpses of the man beneath the carefully constructed facade, the man who had been forced to become a ruthless leader, a man who carried the weight of his family's legacy on his shoulders. She saw his vulnerability, his loneliness, his hidden desire for something more than the life he had been born into. Dario, in turn, seemed to be increasingly captivated by Alessandra's strength, her resilience, her unwavering spirit. He was intrigued by her ability to see beyond his title, to see the man beneath the mask, to challenge him, to defy him, even while she was his captive. Their conversations became more frequent, more intimate. They talked about art, about history, about life, about their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. They shared stories of their childhoods, of their families, of the experiences that had shaped them. One evening, they found themselves in the gardens, walking among the fragrant rose bushes. The air was warm, the sky a canvas of soft pastel colors as the sun began to set. "You remind me of my mother," Dario said, his voice low and thoughtful. "She had the same fire, the same passion for life." Alessandra was surprised by his words. She had seen Isabella Benedetti, Dario's mother, a woman of icy elegance and formidable strength, but she had never imagined that Dario saw a resemblance between them. "Your mother, she seems formidable," Alessandra said, choosing her words carefully. Dario gave a short, humorless laugh.
"She is. She had to be."
To survive in this world, to protect her family, she had to become what she is. Alessandra understood. She knew that the women of the Benedetti family, like the men, were forced to play a role, to adhere to a code, to sacrifice their own desires for the sake of the family's survival. "She loved my father," Dario continued, his voice tinged with sadness. "Despite everything, she loved him. And he loved her. In his own way." Alessandra sensed the unspoken pain in his words, the regret for a love that had been twisted and distorted by the demands of their world. "Do you believe in love, Dario?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I used to. Before I became what I am." He paused, then added, "And you, Alessandra? Do you believe in love?" She met his gaze, her heart beating faster.
"I did. Once.
Before my life was taken from me." He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. The touch, electric, sent a shiver through her. "Perhaps we can both learn to believe again." His words, a mixture of hope and vulnerability, hung in the air between them. They were a promise, a possibility, a dangerous invitation. Their dance of defiance and desire continued, each encounter drawing them closer, each conversation revealing another layer of their complex personalities. They challenged each other, pushed each other's boundaries, tested each other's limits. Alessandra began to assert herself more, refusing to be a passive prisoner. She started to make small changes in the palazzo, rearranging furniture, adding her own personal touches to her studio, even suggesting changes to the menu. She was testing the limits of her freedom, pushing against the boundaries of Dario's control. He allowed it surprisingly. He seemed to be amused by her defiance, intrigued by her willingness to challenge him. He even, on occasion, deferred to her judgment, asking for her opinion on matters of business, of family, of life. One evening, he found her in the library, reading a book on Roman history. "You seem to have found a home here, Alessandra," he said, his voice laced with a hint of irony. She looked up, her expression defiant. "I'm making the best of my situation. But I will never forget that I am here against my will." He nodded, his eyes acknowledging her truth. "I know. But perhaps we can make this arrangement something more than just a marriage of convenience." She closed the book, her heart pounding. "And what do you suggest, Dario? That we pretend to be in love? That we play happy families?" He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "I'm suggesting that we be honest with each other. That we acknowledge the attraction that exists between us." She stood up, her body trembling. "And what if that attraction leads to something more? Something dangerous?" He reached out, his hand cupping her face. "Then we will face that danger together." His words, spoken softly, held a promise of passion, of vulnerability, of a shared future. They were a confirmation of the unspoken desire that had been building between them, a desire that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The dance was reaching its crescendo, the boundaries blurring, the lines between captor and captive, between defiance and desire, fading away. And as she looked into his eyes, she knew that she was falling into a dangerous abyss, a world of passion and power, of secrets and betrayals, a world where love and loyalty were intertwined with fear and violence. She was falling for the capo, and she knew that there was no turning back. The defiance was still there, but it was now intertwined with a desire that was growing stronger every day, a desire that threatened to consume her completely. Chapter 6. Scars Beneath the Surface. The walls of the Palazzo Benedetti, thick and ancient, held more than just secrets. They held memories, echoes of pain, and the lingering scent of violence. Alessandra, increasingly attuned to the subtle nuances of her surroundings, began to sense the weight of those unseen scars. They were etched into the very fabric of the building, whispered in the rustling silks of the drapes, reflected in the somber gazes of the ancestral portraits. One rainy afternoon, While exploring a less frequented wing of the palazzo, she stumbled upon a small, dusty room. It appeared to have been a study, long abandoned. A heavy oak desk dominated the space, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. Papers, yellowed and brittle with age, were scattered across the desk, held down by a tarnished silver paperweight shaped like a snarling wolf, the Benedetti family crest. Alessandra carefully picked up one of the papers. It was a letter, written in a strong, masculine hand, in Italian. She recognized the handwriting as belonging to Dario's father, Antonio Benedetti. The letter was dated years ago, a time when Dario was just a young man. It spoke of a debt owed, a betrayal, and a need for swift, decisive action. The language was cold, ruthless, devoid of any emotion. It was a glimpse into the brutal world that Dario had inherited, the world that had shaped him, that had hardened him. She found other letters, documents, photographs, each piece revealing another fragment of the Benedetti family's history. She discovered a photograph of Dario as a young boy, his eyes wide and innocent, a stark contrast to the hardened man he had become. She saw pictures of him with his mother, Isabella, a beautiful, vibrant woman, her smile radiating warmth and love. There were also pictures of him with his father, Antonio, a stern, imposing figure, his hand resting heavily on Dario's shoulder, a symbol of the weight of expectation, the burden of legacy. As she delved deeper into the room's secrets, she found a small, locked wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard. She hesitated, knowing that she was intruding, that she was uncovering secrets that were not meant for her eyes. But her curiosity, her growing need to understand Dario, to understand the forces that had shaped him, overcame her hesitation. She found a small, rusty key hidden behind one of the portraits. With trembling hands, she unlocked the box. Inside, she found a collection of objects, each one imbued with a powerful emotional resonance. There was a child's drawing, a crude depiction of a family, a man, a woman, and a young boy, holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. There was a dried flower, a single red rose, pressed between the pages of a small, leather-bound book of poetry. There was a silver locket, containing a miniature portrait of a young woman, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. Alessandra recognized the woman in the locket. It was Dario's mother, Isabella, but younger, more vulnerable, before the years of hardship and loss had hardened her features, had dimmed the light in her eyes. She carefully closed the box, replacing it in its hiding place. She felt a profound sense of sadness, a deep empathy for the young boy who had kept these treasures, these reminders of a lost innocence, a lost love, a lost world. That evening, she found Dario in his study, a large, imposing room filled with dark wood furniture and heavy, leather-bound books. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gaze lost in the flickering flames. He turned as she entered, his expression guarded. "Alessandra, what brings you here?" She hesitated, then held out the small, rusty key. "I found this in a room in the old wing." He took the key, his fingers brushing against hers. He recognized it instantly, his eyes darkening with a mixture of surprise and pain. "You shouldn't have been there," he said, his voice low and strained. "I know," she replied softly, "but I needed to understand." He looked at her, his eyes searching, probing. "Understand what?" "You," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Your past. The scars you carry." He turned away, his gaze returning to the fire. "There are things that are best left buried, Alessandra. But they're not buried, are they?" She challenged gently. "They're still here, haunting you, shaping you." He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. "My father, he was a hard man, a ruthless man. He believed in strength, in power, in control. And you?" she asked. "What do you believe in?" He hesitated, then turned to face her, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability that she had never seen before. "I don't know anymore," he admitted, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I was raised to believe in duty, in loyalty, in family. But I've seen too much. Too much violence, too much betrayal, too much loss. Alessandra stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. It's not too late, she said softly.
To change.
To choose a different path. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. Is that possible, Alessandra? After everything I've done? After everything I am? She met his gaze, her heart aching for him. I believe it is, she said, her voice firm with conviction. I believe in redemption, in forgiveness, in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. You see something in me, something I thought was long dead. I see the man beneath the mask. Dario, she whispered. The man you were meant to be. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. It was a kiss of raw emotion, of vulnerability, of a desperate longing for connection, for healing, for redemption. It was a kiss that acknowledged the scars they both carried, the pain they had both endured, the hope they both desperately clung to. The scars beneath the surface were exposed, raw and vulnerable, but in that vulnerability, there was a strength, a connection, a possibility of healing. It was a fragile hope, a dangerous hope, but it was a hope that, for the first time, felt real, felt attainable. And as they stood there, locked in each other's embrace, the whispers of the palazzo seemed to fade away, replaced by the beating of their hearts, a rhythm of shared pain, shared hope, and a burgeoning, undeniable love. Chapter 7. Echoes of a Forgotten Life. The kiss had been a turning point, a watershed moment that irrevocably altered the landscape of Alessandra and Dario's relationship. The walls between them, once seemingly impenetrable, were crumbling, replaced by a fragile bridge built on shared vulnerability, mutual respect, and a burgeoning, undeniable desire. Alessandra found herself thinking about her life before, the life that had been so abruptly taken from her. She remembered her small apartment in Trastevere, filled with sunlight and the scent of oil paints. She remembered her friends, her colleagues, the vibrant community of artists who had been her chosen family. She remembered the joy she found in her work, the satisfaction of bringing beauty back to life, of restoring forgotten masterpieces. It was a life that seemed a world away, a distant echo of a forgotten past. And yet, the memories, once a source of pain and resentment, now offered a strange comfort, a reminder of who she was, of the strength and resilience she possessed. She began to spend more time in her studio, working on the portrait of her grandmother, Nonna Emilia. The canvas, once a symbol of her frustration, now became a canvas of hope, a reflection of her own journey of healing and rediscovery. She found that the light, which had eluded her for so long, had returned. The colors were vibrant, the lines fluid, the portrait imbued with a life, a spirit that mirrored her own awakening. Dario often visited her in the studio, watching her work, his presence a silent, supportive force. He didn't interrupt her, didn't offer criticism, but simply observed, his eyes filled with a quiet admiration. One afternoon, he brought her a small, antique wooden box. It was intricately carved, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a beautiful object in its own right. I found this in the attic, he said, his voice hesitant. I thought you might like it. For your supplies. Alessandra took the box, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. It was a thoughtful gesture, a sign of his growing understanding of her needs, of her passions. It's beautiful, Dario, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his features, making him look younger, more approachable. You deserve beautiful things, Alessandra. His words, simple yet profound, touched her deeply. They were a recognition of her worth, of her value, not as a possession, but as a person. She opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, she found a collection of old photographs, letters, and postcards. They were not Benedetti family heirlooms, but personal mementos, belonging to someone else, someone who had lived in the palazzo long ago. She carefully picked up one of the photographs. It was a faded sepia image of a young woman, standing in the gardens, a smile on her face, a book in her hand. She looked familiar, strikingly so. Alessandra turned the photograph over. On the back, written in a delicate, feminine hand, was a name. Isabella Rossi, 1922. She looked at Dario, her eyes wide with surprise. This is your grandmother's name. But before she married. Dario nodded, his expression thoughtful. My grandmother, she lived here before. Before the Benedettis. This was her family home. Alessandra was stunned. She had never known this, had never heard anyone speak of it. It was another layer of the Palazzo's history, another secret revealed. What happened? She asked, her voice filled with curiosity. How did the Benedettis come to own it? Dario hesitated, then sighed. It's a long story, Alessandra. A story of love and loss, of betrayal and sacrifice. He told her the story of his grandmother, Isabella Rossi, a young woman of beauty and spirit who had fallen in love with a young man, a promising artist who was not deemed suitable by her family. They had planned to elope, to run away together, to start a new life. But their plans had been thwarted. Isabella's family had intervened, forcing her to marry a wealthy, powerful man, a man who could secure their family's fortune, their social standing. The young artist, heartbroken and disillusioned, had left Rome, disappearing without a trace. Isabella had married the man her family had chosen, but she had never forgotten her first love. She had lived a life of quiet desperation, of unfulfilled longing, of silent regret. The Palazzo, her family home, had been sold to the Benedettis after her father's death, a symbol of her family's decline, of her own lost dreams. Alessandra listened, her heart aching for the young woman in the photograph, for the life she had lost, for the love she had been denied. She saw a reflection of her own situation in Isabella Rossi's story, a parallel that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. She never forgot him, Dario said, his voice filled with sadness. She kept these mementos hidden away, a reminder of the life she could have had. Alessandra understood. She understood the need to hold on to the past, to cherish the memories of a lost love, a lost life. She understood the pain of being forced to live a life not of one's choosing, of sacrificing one's own desires for the sake of family, of duty, of obligation. The echoes of Isabella Rossi's life resonated within Alessandra, a reminder of the enduring power of love, the enduring pain of loss, the enduring strength of the human spirit. It was a connection to the past, a bridge between two women, separated by time, yet united by their shared experiences, their shared struggles, their shared hopes. And in that connection, Alessandra found a new strength, a new resolve, a new determination to forge her own path, to create her own future, to find her own happiness within the confines of her new reality. The echoes of a forgotten life were a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could endure, love could flourish, and beauty could be found, even in the most unexpected of places. Chapter 8. The Price of Loyalty. The fragile peace that had settled over the Palazzo Benedetti, the tentative steps towards trust and understanding between Alessandra and Dario, were shattered by a sudden, brutal act of violence. A rival family, the Morettis, long simmering with resentment towards the Benedetti's dominance, launched a brazen attack on one of Dario's businesses, a nightclub in the heart of Rome. Several people were injured, one fatally. The attack was a direct challenge to Dario's authority, a blatant violation of the unspoken code that governed the city's underworld. It was a declaration of war, a sign that the delicate balance of power that had existed for years was about to be shattered. Alessandra witnessed the aftermath of the attack firsthand. Dario had brought her with him to the nightclub, a rare excursion outside the palazzo walls. He had wanted to show her another side of his world, the world of business, of power, of control. He had wanted to impress her, perhaps to demonstrate his influence, his reach. But the evening had ended in chaos, in bloodshed, in terror. Alessandra had seen the fear in Dario's eyes, the rage, the cold, ruthless determination that had settled over his features as he surveyed the damage, as he barked orders to his men, as he vowed revenge. She had seen the price of loyalty, the cost of power, the brutal reality of the world he inhabited. It was a world of violence, of betrayal, of constant threat, a world where life was cheap, where honor was a commodity, where survival depended on ruthlessness and unwavering control. Back at the palazzo, the atmosphere was tense, charged with a sense of impending doom. The staff moved around with hushed voices, their eyes filled with fear. Security was tightened, armed guards patrolled the grounds, the heavy gates were locked and barred. The palazzo, once a refuge, now felt like a fortress under siege. Dario was consumed with the need for retribution. He spent hours locked in his study, meeting with his advisors, his lieutenants, his soldiers. He was planning his response, calculating his moves, preparing for war. Alessandra saw the toll it was taking on him. He was exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, his face drawn and haggard. He barely ate, barely slept, his mind consumed by the need to protect his family, to avenge the attack, to maintain his power. She tried to reach him, to offer him comfort, to remind him of the man beneath the mask, the man who had shown her glimpses of vulnerability, of tenderness, of a desire for something more than the life he had been born into. But he was distant, preoccupied, his mind focused on the brutal realities of his world. He pushed her away, gently but firmly, retreating behind the walls of his carefully constructed facade. "This is not your world, Alessandra," he said, his voice cold and detached. "You don't understand. You can't understand." She understood more than he realized. She understood the fear, the pressure, the weight of responsibility he carried. She understood the price of loyalty, the cost of power, the sacrifices he had to make. But she also understood that he was losing himself, that he was becoming the man he had always feared becoming, the man his father had been, a man consumed by violence, by revenge, by the need for control. One evening, she found him in the gardens, standing by the rose bushes, his gaze lost in the darkness. She approached him cautiously, her heart aching for him.
"Dario," she said softly, "please talk to me."
He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "There's nothing to talk about, Alessandra.
This is my life. This is who I am."
"No," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "That's not who you are. That's who you think you have to be." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You're naive, Dolcezza. You live in a world of art, of beauty, of dreams. This is the real world. A world of blood and violence. A world where only the strong survive." "And what about love?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What about compassion? What about hope?" He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "Those are luxuries I cannot afford, Alessandra. Not in this world. But you deserve them, Dario," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We all deserve them." She reached out, her hand cupping his face. He didn't pull away. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a moment, as if savoring the brief respite from the darkness that surrounded him. The moment was broken, however, when Lorenzo, Dario's younger brother, entered. "Dario, the Morettis have requested a sit-down." Lorenzo's voice held no emotion. Dario straightened instantly, that mask of the ruthless capo falling back into place. "Then we will meet them." Before he could turn and leave, Alessandra grabbed his hand. "Be careful, Dario," she said. He looked at her hand, then into her eyes, that hardened expression softening for the smallest fraction of a moment. "Always," he responded, before turning to follow his brother. She was left, standing in the darkness, the scent of roses a bitter reminder of the beauty that could exist, even in the midst of violence and despair. The price of loyalty was high, she knew, but she was beginning to realize that the price of love might be even higher. And she was not sure if she, or Dario, was willing to pay that price. The meeting with the Morettis was a turning point. She instinctively felt it. One way or another. Chapter 9. A glimmer of unexpected hope. The sit-down with the Morettis was held at a neutral location, a secluded villa in the Alban Hills, overlooking the ancient city of Rome. The villa belonged to Don Angelo, an elder statesman of the Roman underworld, a respected figure who acted as a mediator between the families, a keeper of the peace, a guardian of the fragile code that governed their world. Alessandra had insisted on accompanying Dario. She had refused to be left behind, to be kept in the dark, to be treated as a fragile possession. She had argued, pleaded, and finally demanded to be included, to be a part of the negotiations, to be a witness to the events that would shape their future. Dario had resisted at first, arguing that it was too dangerous, that she didn't belong in that world, that he needed to protect her. But she had been adamant, her resolve unwavering, her determination fueled by a mixture of fear and a growing sense of loyalty, a burgeoning love for the man who was both her captor and her something more. Finally, he had relented, his reluctance giving way to a grudging respect for her strength, her courage, her unwavering spirit. The atmosphere at the villa was tense, charged with an undercurrent of violence. The room was filled with men, the leaders of the two families, their bodyguards, their advisors, their soldiers. They were all dressed in dark suits, their faces impassive, their eyes watchful, their hands never far from the weapons they carried beneath their jackets. Don Angelo sat at the head of the long, polished table, his presence commanding, his authority unquestioned. He was an old man, his face lined with wrinkles, his eyes wise and weary, his voice raspy but firm. He had seen it all. The violence, the betrayals, the endless cycle of revenge that had plagued the Roman underworld for generations. Dario sat to Don Angelo's right, Alessandra beside him. She felt his tension, the coiled energy that radiated from him, the controlled fury that simmered beneath his calm exterior. She reached out, her hand covering his, a silent gesture of support, of solidarity, of love. He looked at her, his eyes acknowledging her presence, her courage, her unwavering loyalty. He squeezed her hand, a brief, fleeting gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a sign of his trust, his growing dependence on her, his recognition of her as an equal, as a partner, as a woman he loved. The negotiations were long and arduous, a delicate dance of threats and counter-threats, of accusations and denials, of posturing and concessions. The Morettis, led by their capo, Giovanni Moretti, a ruthless, ambitious man, demanded compensation for the attack on their business, a public apology, and a share of the Benedetti's territory. Dario refused to concede, his voice cold and unwavering, his eyes fixed on Giovanni Moretti with a steely gaze. He countered their demands, reminding them of their own transgressions, their own violations of the code, their own acts of violence. The tension in the room escalated, the threat of violence hanging heavy in the air. Alessandra felt her heart pounding, her palms sweating, her fear growing with each passing moment. She knew that one wrong word, one misstep, could ignite the powder keg, could plunge them into a bloody, all-out war. Don Angelo intervened, his voice calm but firm, reminding them of the consequences of such a war, of the devastation it would wreak on both families, on the entire city. He urged them to find a compromise, to reach an agreement, to preserve the fragile peace that had existed for so long. The negotiations continued, hour after hour, the tension slowly easing as both sides began to make concessions, to find common ground, to reach a compromise. Finally, after hours of tense negotiations, an agreement was reached. The Morettis would receive compensation, but not as much as they had demanded. There would be no public apology, but a private acknowledgement of wrongdoing. There would be no sharing of territory, but a joint venture, a collaboration on a new, lucrative business opportunity. It was a fragile truce, a temporary ceasefire, a postponement of the inevitable, perhaps. But it was a glimmer of hope, a sign that reason could prevail, that violence could be averted, that peace, however fleeting, was possible. As they left the villa, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and orange, Alessandra felt a sense of relief, a sense of exhaustion, and a sense of pride. She had stood by Dario's side, had faced the danger with him, had offered him her support, her strength, her love. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something more. "You are magnificent, Alessandra," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "You are my strength." She smiled, her heart swelling with a love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "And you are mine, Dario," she said softly. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. It was a kiss of gratitude, of respect, of a burgeoning love that had survived the crucible of violence, of fear, of uncertainty. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, that confirmed their commitment to each other, that promised a future, however uncertain, together. The glimmer of hope that had emerged from the darkness of the negotiations, the unexpected reprieve from the impending war, was a fragile thing, but it was real. It was a testament to the power of reason, the power of compromise, the power of love to overcome even the most daunting of obstacles. And as they drove back to the palazzo, the rising sun casting a golden glow over the ancient city, Alessandra knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her strength, her courage, her voice. And she had found her love, a love that was both dangerous and exhilarating, a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of places, a love that had the power to heal, to redeem, to transform. The unexpected hope was a beacon, guiding them through the darkness, towards a future that was still uncertain, but no longer bleak. Chapter 10. Beneath the Veil of Control. The fragile truce with the Morettas held, but the tension within the Palazzo Benedetti remained. Dario, though outwardly calm, was a coiled spring, his senses on high alert, anticipating the next attack, the next betrayal, the next challenge to his authority. He was constantly surrounded by his guards, his lieutenants, his advisors, his world shrinking to the confines of his power, his control, his responsibilities. Alessandra found herself increasingly isolated, shut out from his world, excluded from his decisions, relegated to the role of the decorative wife, the silent observer. She understood the need for caution, the need for security, the need to protect his family, his business, his power. But she resented the distance that had grown between them, the walls that he had erected, the barriers that he had put in place. She missed their conversations, their shared moments of vulnerability, their tentative steps towards intimacy. She missed the man she had glimpsed beneath the mask of the capo, the man who had shown her glimpses of his pain, his doubts, his hopes, his desires. She tried to reach him, to break through the walls, to remind him of the connection they had forged, the love they had begun to build. But he was distant, preoccupied, his mind consumed by the demands of his world, the pressures of his position, the weight of his responsibilities. "You don't understand, Alessandra," he said, his voice weary, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "This is my life. This is who I am. I cannot change. I cannot escape. But you don't have to be alone, Dario," she pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Let me in. Let me help you. Let me share your burden." He shook his head, his expression resigned. "You cannot share this burden, Alessandra. It is mine to bear. Alone." She refused to accept his defeat, his resignation, his isolation. She knew that beneath the veil of control, beneath the mask of the capo, there was a man who longed for connection, for love, for a different life. She had seen him, had touched him, had felt his heart beating in time with hers. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She started to investigate, to gather information, to learn more about the Morettas, about their business, about their connections, about their weaknesses. She used her contacts in the art world, her friends, her colleagues, her former life, to gather intelligence, to piece together the puzzle, to uncover the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface. She discovered that the Morettas were not as strong as they appeared, that they were facing internal divisions, financial difficulties, and challenges from other families. She learned that Giovanni Moretti was ambitious, ruthless, but also reckless, impulsive, and prone to making mistakes. She also discovered a connection between the Morettas and a powerful politician, a man who had been providing them with protection, with influence, with access to lucrative deals. It was a dangerous connection, a risky alliance, a betrayal of the unspoken code that governed the Roman underworld. Alessandra carefully documented her findings, gathering evidence, compiling a dossier of information that could be used to expose the Morettus, to weaken their position, to undermine their power. She knew that she was playing a dangerous game, that she was putting herself at risk, that she was stepping into a world of violence, of betrayal, of treachery. But she was determined to help Dario, to protect him, to show him that he was not alone, that she was his partner, his ally, his love. One evening, she presented her findings to Dario. She laid out the evidence, explained her conclusions, revealed the connections she had uncovered. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his mind processing the information, calculating the implications, assessing the risks. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You should not have done this, Alessandra. This is not your world. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," she replied, her voice firm with conviction. "And I did it for you, Dario. To help you. To protect you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. "You are fearless, Alessandra. And reckless." Perhaps, she conceded. "But I'm also loyal. And I love you." Her words, spoken softly, hung in the air between them. They were a declaration, a confession, a challenge. He reached out, his hand cupping her face. "You should not love me, Alessandra," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I am not worthy of your love. I am a dangerous man. A man who brings only pain and suffering. But you're also a good man, Dario," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I see it in you. I feel it, and I believe in you." He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. It was a kiss of desperation, of longing, of a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances, a love that had defied the odds, a love that had survived the darkness. The veil of control had been lifted, the mask of the capo had slipped, revealing the man beneath, the man who was vulnerable, who was capable of love, who was worthy of redemption. And in that moment, Alessandra knew that she had made the right choice, that she had risked everything for a love that was worth fighting for, a love that had the power to change everything. The danger was still there, the threats were still real, but the love had become a shield, a weapon, a source of strength, a beacon of hope. And together, they would face whatever came next, united by their love, their loyalty, their unwavering commitment to each other. The revelation had changed the dynamic, shifting the power, creating a new balance, forging a deeper bond. Chapter 11. The cracks begin to show. Alessandra's revelation about the Morettus vulnerabilities and their illicit connection with the politician sent ripples through Dario's organization. He used the information strategically, subtly undermining Giovanni Moretti's position, exposing his weaknesses, and turning his allies against him. He did it discreetly, without revealing Alessandra's involvement, protecting her from the potential repercussions, shielding her from the dangers of his world. But the stress of the ongoing conflict, the constant threat of violence, the weight of his responsibilities, began to take its toll on Dario. He became withdrawn, irritable, his sleep plagued by nightmares, his days consumed by a relentless paranoia. He pushed Alessandra away, erecting walls between them, retreating into the darkness of his world, shutting her out from his fears, his doubts, his vulnerabilities. Alessandra saw the cracks beginning to show, the strain on his features, the exhaustion in his eyes, the tremor in his hands. She worried about him, about his mental and physical health, about the toll that his life was taking on him. She tried to reach him, to offer him comfort, to remind him of her love, of her support, of her unwavering loyalty. But he resisted, his defenses impenetrable, his emotions locked away behind a wall of control, of stoicism, of ingrained habit. One evening, she found him in his study, staring at the fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "Dario," she said softly, approaching him cautiously.
Please talk to me.
Tell me what's wrong. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her presence, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. There's nothing to talk about, Alessandra, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion.
This is my life. This is who I am.
I cannot change. I cannot escape. Don't say that, she pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. You can change. You can escape. You just have to want to. He finally turned to face her, his eyes filled with a raw pain that tore at her heart. And what if I don't want to? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. What if this is all I know? What if this is all I'm good for? Alessandra stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. That's not true, Dario, she said, her voice firm with conviction.
You are so much more than this.
You are a good man, a kind man, a loving man. I see it in you. I feel it. He shook his head, his expression despairing. You see what you want to see, Alessandra. You see the illusion, not the reality.
No, she insisted.
I see the truth. I see the man beneath the mask, the man you were meant to be, the man you still can be. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Don't give up, Dario, she whispered. Don't let this world destroy you. Don't let it take away your soul. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. It was the first time she had seen him cry, the first time he had allowed himself to show such vulnerability, such raw emotion. She held him close, her arms wrapped around him, offering him her strength, her comfort, her love. He clung to her, his body trembling, his grip tightening around her as if she were his lifeline, his only anchor in a sea of darkness and despair. The cracks were beginning to show, the carefully constructed facade was crumbling, the mask of the capo was slipping, revealing the vulnerable, broken man beneath. It was a painful process, a terrifying transformation, but it was also a necessary step, a crucial turning point, a glimmer of hope in the midst of the darkness. After a while, he pulled away, wiping his eyes, his expression still strained, but with a hint of something else. A flicker of hope, perhaps? A glimmer of resolve? I don't know what to do, Alessandra, he admitted, his voice hoarse with emotion. I'm lost.
I'm afraid.
You're not alone, Dario, she said softly. I'm here. I'll always be here. We'll face this together. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, seeking reassurance, seeking strength, seeking love. Promise me, he whispered. Promise me you won't leave me. I promise, she said, her voice firm with conviction. I will never leave you. The cracks were still there, the wounds were still raw, but the bond between them had deepened, strengthened by the shared vulnerability, the shared pain, the shared love. The future was still uncertain, the dangers were still real, but they were no longer facing them alone. They had each other, and that, Alessandra knew, was all that mattered. The cracks were a sign of weakness, but they were also a sign of humanity, a sign of hope, a sign that even the most hardened heart could be touched, could be healed, could be loved. The showing of these cracks was a risk, but one that brought them closer. Chapter 12. Secrets in the Midnight Hour. The vulnerability Dario had shown was a turning point, a crack in the fortress he had built around his heart. He began to open up to Alessandra, sharing his fears, his doubts, his regrets, the burdens he had carried for so long. Their nights became a sanctuary, a time for whispered confessions, for shared tears, for tentative steps towards healing and understanding. One night, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within their hearts, Dario told Alessandra about his childhood, about the pressures he had faced as the heir to the Benedetti legacy, about the expectations that had been placed upon him from the moment he was born. My father, he was a hard man, Alessandra, Dario said, his voice filled with a mixture of resentment and a strange kind of respect. He believed in strength, in power, in control. He taught me everything I know about business, about loyalty, about survival. But he also taught you fear, Alessandra said softly, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. Dario nodded, his eyes clouded with painful memories.
He did.
He taught me that weakness was unacceptable, that emotion was a liability, that love was a distraction. "And do you believe that?" Alessandra asked, her voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, then shook his head.
"No.
"Not anymore. You've shown me that there's another way. That strength can be found in vulnerability, that emotion can be a source of power, that love can be a reason to live." He told her about his first love, a young woman named Sophia, a girl from a different world, a world of art and music and literature, a world that had been forbidden to him. "She was everything I wasn't," Dario said, his voice filled with a bittersweet longing. "She was kind, gentle, compassionate. She saw the good in me, the potential for something more than the life I was destined for." "What happened to her?" Alessandra asked, her heart aching for the young man he had been, for the love he had lost. Dario's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "My father," he disapproved. He saw her as a threat, a weakness, a distraction. He arranged for her to leave, to disappear. Alessandra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He didn't. Dario shook his head.
"No.
He didn't kill her, but he made sure she was gone. Out of my life. Forever." Alessandra understood the pain, the loss, the guilt that he had carried for so long. She understood the fear that had shaped him, the fear of losing someone he loved, the fear of showing vulnerability, the fear of defying his father, the fear of failing to live up to the expectations of his family, his legacy. "I never saw her again," Dario said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I never knew what happened to her. I tried to forget her. I tried to become the man my father wanted me to be, the man I thought I had to be."
"But you couldn't," Alessandra said softly.
"Because that's not who you are, Dario. You are a good man. You are a kind man. You are a loving man." She held him close, her arms wrapped around him, offering him her comfort, her support, her unwavering love. He clung to her, his body trembling, his tears soaking her hair. The secrets shared in the midnight hour, the confessions whispered in the darkness, were a catharsis, a release, a cleansing of the wounds that had festered for so long. They were a testament to the power of love, the power of trust, the power of vulnerability to heal even the deepest scars. As the storm subsided, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds, a new sense of peace settled over them. The secrets had been revealed, the burdens had been shared, the wounds had begun to heal. "Thank you, Alessandra," Dario whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. For listening, for understanding, for loving me. "I will always love you, Dario," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "And I will always be here for you." The secrets of the past had been brought to light, the shadows had been dispelled, and in their place, a new hope had emerged, a fragile but resilient blossom of love, a promise of a future where healing was possible, where redemption was within reach, where happiness could be found, even in the midst of the darkness. The sharing of the secrets created an intimacy, a deepening bond, a new level of understanding between them. It wasn't just a confession. It was a gift, a sharing of his deepest self, a trust placed in her hands. And she, in turn, held that trust sacred, a treasure more valuable than any jewel, any possession, any power. Chapter 13. The Unraveling of Truth. The newfound intimacy between Alessandra and Dario allowed for a deeper understanding, not just of each other, but of the complex web of relationships and rivalries that define the Roman underworld. Alessandra, with her keen eye for detail and her growing knowledge of Dario's world, began to notice inconsistencies, discrepancies, and unanswered questions that had been lurking beneath the surface. She started to delve deeper into the Benedetti family history, spending hours in the Palazzo's library, poring over old documents, letters, and records. She discovered that the rivalry with the Morettis was not just a recent development, but a feud that stretched back generations, rooted in a betrayal that had occurred decades ago. The original conflict, she learned, was not about territory or business, but about a woman. Isabella Rossi, Dario's grandmother, had been promised to the heir of the Moretti family, a man named Lorenzo Moretti. But she had fallen in love with a young artist, and had to fight her family, choosing love over duty, passion over obligation. The Morettis had never forgiven the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss of face. They had held a grudge against the Rossis and later, against the Benedettis, who had acquired the Rossi family home, the palazzo that was now Alessandra's prison and her sanctuary. The current conflict, Alessandra realized, was not just about Giovanni Moretti's ambition and ruthlessness, but about a long-standing vendetta, a desire for revenge, a need to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. But there was more. Alessandra discovered a hidden connection between Giovanni Moretti and the politician who had been providing him with protection and influence. The politician, a man named Senator Corrado, was not just an ally, but a silent partner, a secret beneficiary of the Morettis' illegal activities. And Senator Corrado, Alessandra discovered, had a connection to Dario's father, Antonio Benedetti. They had been rivals, enemies, competing for power, for influence, for control. Alessandra began to suspect that Antonio Benedetti's death, which had been attributed to a heart attack, might not have been natural. She found evidence, subtle clues, hidden in the old records that suggested foul play, a conspiracy, a carefully orchestrated assassination. She realized that she was treading on dangerous ground, that she was uncovering secrets that could shatter the foundations of the Roman underworld, that could expose the truth about Dario's father, about the Morettis, about Senator Corrado, about the entire web of corruption and violence that had plagued the city for generations. She knew that she had to tell Dario, but she hesitated, fearing his reaction, fearing the consequences, fearing the pain it would cause him. She knew that the truth could destroy him, could shatter his illusions, could force him to confront the reality of his family's legacy, the darkness that had shaped his life. One evening, she found him in his study, poring over documents, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. "Dario," she said softly, approaching him cautiously. "I need to show you something." He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and a flicker of hope, perhaps a glimmer of trust that had been absent for so long. She laid out the evidence she had gathered, the documents, the letters, the records, the clues that pointed to a conspiracy, to a betrayal, to a murder. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable, his eyes darkening with each revelation, his body tensing with a growing anger, a simmering rage. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his mind reeling from the implications, the shock, the pain of the truth. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled, but laced with a raw emotion that she had never heard before. "My father, he was murdered?" Alessandra nodded, her heart aching for him. "I believe so, Dario. And I think Giovanni Moretti and Senator Corrado were involved." He stood up, his fists clenched, his body trembling with rage. "I will kill them," he vowed, his voice a guttural growl. "I will make them pay for what they did." Alessandra rushed to him, her arms wrapping around him, trying to calm him, to restrain him, to prevent him from doing something rash, something reckless. "No, Dario," she pleaded. Don't let them win. Don't let them turn you into them." He struggled against her hold, his anger consuming him, his grief overwhelming him, his need for revenge burning like a fire in his soul. "They took everything from me," he raged. "My father, my family, my life. But you still have me, Dario," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "And you still have your honor. Don't let them take that away from you, too." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw pain, a desperate plea for help, for guidance, for love. "What do I do, Alessandra?" he whispered, his voice broken, his spirit shattered. "What do I do?" She held him close, her tears mingling with his, her love a shield against the darkness, a beacon of hope in the midst of despair. "We'll do it together, Dario," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "We'll expose them. We'll bring them to justice. We'll find a way." The unraveling of the truth was a devastating blow, a painful revelation, but it was also a catalyst, a turning point, a chance for a new beginning. The secrets of the past had been brought to light, the lies had been exposed, and in their place, a new path had emerged, a path towards justice, towards redemption, towards a future free from the shadows of the past. The truth was a weapon, a powerful tool that could be used to dismantle the web of corruption, to break the cycle of violence, to build a new foundation of trust, of honesty, of love. It was a risky path, a dangerous journey, but it was the only path that could lead them to the light. Chapter 14. A Bond Forged in Fire. The revelation of Antonio Benedetti's murder and the conspiracy involving Giovanni Moretti and Senator Corrado galvanized Dario and Alessandra. They were no longer just a reluctant bride and a powerful capo, they were partners, allies, bound together by a shared purpose, a burning desire for justice, and a love that had been forged in the fire of adversity. They knew that exposing Moretti and Corrado would be dangerous, that it would require careful planning, meticulous execution, and unwavering courage. They were up against powerful enemies, men who would stop at nothing to protect their interests, their secrets, their power. Alessandra, with her intelligence, her resourcefulness, and her connections in the art world, became the strategist, the investigator, the gatherer of information. She used her contacts, her knowledge, her intuition to uncover further evidence, to piece together the puzzle, to build an irrefutable case against Moretti and Corrado. Dario, with his power, his influence, and his network of loyal followers, became the enforcer, the protector, the force that would ensure their safety and carry out their plan. He used his resources, his connections, his authority to gather intelligence, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation, to protect Alessandra from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. They worked together, seamlessly, their strengths complementing each other, their weaknesses mitigated by their shared love and unwavering trust. They spent hours strategizing, planning, analyzing every detail, anticipating every possible scenario, preparing for every eventuality. They also sought the help of Don Angelo, the elder statesman of the Roman underworld, the respected mediator who had brokered the truce between the Benedettis and the Morettis. They presented him with the evidence they had gathered, the proof of Moretti's involvement in Antonio Benedetti's murder, the evidence of Corrado's complicity, the irrefutable proof of their betrayal of the code, their violation of the unspoken rules that govern their world. Don Angelo listened intently, his face impassive, his eyes wise and weary, his mind processing the information, assessing the implications, weighing the consequences. He had known Antonio Benedetti, had respected him, had even, perhaps, admired him. He had also known Giovanni Moretti, had witnessed his ambition, his ruthlessness, his growing disregard for the traditions, the values, the code that had held their world together for generations. Finally, he spoke, his voice grave and resolute. "The truth must be revealed," he said. "Justice must be served. The code must be upheld." He agreed to help them, to use his influence, his authority, his network of contacts to expose Moretti and Corrado, to bring them to justice, to restore honor to the Benedetti name, to cleanse the Roman underworld of the corruption that had festered for so long. With Don Angelo's support, they set their plan in motion. They leaked information to the press, carefully crafted stories that hinted at the conspiracy, at the involvement of Moretti and Corrado in Antonio Benedetti's murder. They used their contacts in law enforcement and the judiciary to ensure that the leaks were investigated, that the evidence was examined, that the truth was brought to light. The pressure on Moretti and Corrado mounted, the walls closing in, their allies deserting them, their enemies circling like vultures, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Giovanni Moretti, desperate and cornered, made a fatal mistake. He ordered a hit on Alessandra, hoping to silence her, to eliminate the threat she posed, to prevent her from revealing the truth. But Dario's men intercepted the assassins, protecting Alessandra, thwarting Moretti's desperate attempt to silence her. The attack was a clear violation of the truce, a blatant act of aggression, a confirmation of Moretti's guilt. It was the final straw. Don Angelo, with the support of the other families, declared Giovanni Moretti an outcast, a traitor, a man without honor. He was stripped of his power, his position, his protection. He was left alone, vulnerable, exposed to the wrath of his enemies, to the justice of the Roman underworld. Senator Corrado, seeing his ally fall, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him, attempted to flee the country, to escape the consequences of his actions. But Dario's men intercepted him, capturing him, bringing him before Don Angelo, before the Council of Families, before the judgment of the Roman underworld. The bond between Alessandra and Dario, forged in the fire of adversity, tempered by the shared danger, strengthened by the unwavering love and trust, had become unbreakable. They had faced their enemies together, had fought for justice, had risked everything for each other. And they had won. The conspiracy had been exposed, the truth had been revealed, justice had been served. The bond was not just of love, but of respect, of shared purpose, of a deep and abiding understanding that transcended their different backgrounds, their different worlds, their different lives. They were two halves of a whole, stronger together than they could ever be apart. Chapter 15. The Taste of Forbidden Freedom. With Moretti and Corrado brought to justice, a semblance of peace returned to the Roman underworld. The Benedetti family, under Dario's leadership, emerged stronger, their honor restored, their position solidified. Dario, guided by Alessandra's wisdom and compassion, began to implement changes, to steer the family away from the brutal traditions of the past towards a more legitimate, less violent future. Alessandra, no longer a reluctant bride, but a respected partner, a trusted advisor, a beloved wife, found a new sense of purpose, a new sense of belonging, a new sense of freedom. She was no longer confined to the palazzo, no longer restricted by the constraints of her gilded cage. She was free to move about the city, to reconnect with her old friends, to resume her work as an art restorer, to reclaim the life that had been taken from her. But she chose to remain by Dario's side, to support him, to guide him, to help him navigate the complexities of his world, to build a new future together. She had found a home in the Palazzo Benedetti, a home not of stone and mortar, but of love and trust, of shared purpose and mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, Dario surprised Alessandra with a trip to the coast, to a secluded villa overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. It was a place where they could escape the pressures of Rome, the demands of his world, the shadows of the past. It was a place where they could be themselves, just Dario and Alessandra, two people in love, free from the constraints of their respective roles, their responsibilities, their legacies. They spent their days swimming in the turquoise waters, walking along the sandy beaches, exploring the hidden coves and picturesque villages along the coast. They shared meals under the stars, talked for hours, laughed, cried, and rediscovered the simple joys of life, the beauty of the world around them, the magic of their connection. One evening, as they sat on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant hues of orange and purple, Dario turned to Alessandra, his eyes filled with a love that was both profound and enduring. "I never thought I could be this happy, Alessandra," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I never thought I deserved to be." Alessandra smiled, her heart swelling with a love that matched his own. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Dario," she said softly. "And we'll find it, together." He reached out, his hand taking hers, their fingers intertwining, a symbol of their unbreakable bond, their unwavering commitment, their enduring love. "I was so afraid of losing you, Alessandra," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. When he tried to show, she said, placing a finger on his lips. "It's over, Dario. We're safe. We're together. That's all that matters." He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. It was a kiss of gratitude, of relief, of a love that had been tested by fire, had survived the darkness, had emerged stronger, more resilient, more profound. They spent the night making love, their bodies entwined, their souls connected, their hearts beating as one. It was a celebration of their love, of their freedom, of their new beginning. The next morning, Alessandra woke up to the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the sunlight streaming through the windows, the scent of the sea filling the air. Dario was still asleep, his arm wrapped around her, his body warm and comforting. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with love, with gratitude, with a sense of peace she had never known before. She had found her freedom, not in escaping her gilded cage, but in embracing it, in transforming it, in making it her own. She had found her love, not in the world she had left behind, but in the most unexpected of places, in the arms of a man who had once been her captor, but who had become her savior, her partner, her soulmate. She gently kissed him awake, her lips lingering on his, her love a silent promise of a future filled with happiness, with peace, with a freedom that was both exhilarating and profound. It was a forbidden freedom, a freedom that had been earned through hardship, through sacrifice, through unwavering courage, through a love that had defied the odds, that had conquered the darkness, that had emerged triumphant. And as they held each other close, the taste of that freedom was sweeter than anything they had ever imagined. It was the freedom to love, to be loved, to be themselves, to create their own destiny, to build a new world, together. Chapter 16. Reckoning with the Past. The escape to the sea was a respite, a temporary reprieve from the complexities of their lives, but the past, like a persistent shadow, continued to linger, casting a long, dark shadow over their newfound happiness. Dario, despite his efforts to move forward, to embrace a new future, was still haunted by the ghosts of his past, by the legacy of his father, by the violence and betrayal that had shaped his life. Alessandra knew that they could not truly move forward until they had reckoned with the past, until they had confronted the demons that continued to torment Dario, until they had found a way to reconcile the man he was with the man he wanted to be. She suggested a trip to Sicily, to the ancestral home of the Benedetti family, a place Dario had avoided for years, a place filled with painful memories, with unresolved conflicts, with the lingering presence of his father. Dario was reluctant at first, resistant to the idea of revisiting the past, of confronting the ghosts that haunted him. He feared the pain, the grief, the anger that he had buried for so long. "I don't want to go back there, Alessandra," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of dread and a strange kind of longing. It's too painful." "I know, Dario," she said softly, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "But it's also necessary to heal, to move forward, to be free." She convinced him, gently but firmly, arguing that they needed to understand his father, to understand his motivations, to understand the forces that had shaped him, in order to break free from the cycle of violence, to build a new future, a future free from the shadows of the past. They traveled to Sicily, to a small, ancient town nestled in the hills overlooking the Ionian Sea. The town was dominated by the Benedetti family villa, an imposing structure of stone and marble, a symbol of their power, their wealth, their legacy. The villa was filled with memories, with echoes of the past, with the lingering presence of Antonio Benedetti. Dario walked through the halls, his footsteps echoing in the silence, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings, his heart heavy with a mixture of grief, anger, and a strange kind of nostalgia. Alessandra saw the pain in his eyes, the turmoil in his soul, the struggle he was facing as he confronted the ghosts of his past. She stayed by his side, offering him her support, her comfort, her unwavering love. They visited his father's grave, a simple marble tomb in the town's cemetery. Dario stood before the grave, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the inscription, his body trembling with a suppressed emotion. I don't know what to say, Alessandra," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I hated him, and I loved him." Alessandra placed a hand on his arm, her touch a silent gesture of understanding, of empathy, of love. "It's okay, Dario," she said softly. "You don't have to say anything. Just feel." He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his cheeks, his body racked with sobs. He was grieving, not just for his father, but for the lost innocence of his childhood, for the life he could have had, for the man he could have been. Alessandra held him close, her arms wrapped around him, offering him her strength, her comfort, her unwavering love. She was his anchor, his lifeline, his safe harbor in the storm of his emotions. They spent several days in Sicily, exploring the town, talking to the locals, uncovering the history of the Benedetti family, learning about Dario's father, about his life, about his legacy. They discovered that Antonio Benedetti was not just a ruthless, violent man, but also a complex, multifaceted individual. He had been a loving husband, a devoted father, a respected leader. He had also been a man driven by ambition, by a need for power, by a fear of weakness. Dario began to understand his father, to see him not just as a monster, but as a human being, flawed and imperfect, shaped by his own past, by his own circumstances, by his own fears. The reckoning with the past was a painful process, a difficult journey, but it was also a necessary step towards healing, towards forgiveness, towards freedom. Dario was finally able to confront his demons, to reconcile his conflicting emotions, to make peace with his father, to accept his legacy, to move forward with his life. As they left Sicily, the sun setting over the Ionian Sea, casting a golden glow over the ancient landscape, Dario turned to Alessandra, his eyes filled with a newfound peace, a quiet strength, a profound gratitude. "Thank you, Alessandra," he said, his voice husky with emotion, for bringing me here, for helping me to face my past,
for loving me.
"I will always love you, Dario," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "And I will always be here for you." The reckoning with the past had been a painful but necessary journey, a process of healing and forgiveness, a step towards a future free from the shadows of the past. They had confronted the demons, had made peace with the ghosts, had found a way to reconcile the man Dario was with the man he wanted to be. And in doing so, they had strengthened their bond, deepened their love, and paved the way for a new beginning, a future filled with hope, with peace, with a freedom that was both hard-earned and deeply cherished. Chapter 17. The Enemy of My Enemy. The newfound peace and understanding that Dario and Alessandra had achieved were soon tested. The takedown of Moretti and Corrado had created a power vacuum in the Roman underworld, and other families were vying for dominance, eager to seize the opportunity to expand their territories, their influence, their power. One family in particular, the Salernitanos from Naples, emerged as a major threat. They were known for their ruthlessness, their brutality, and their extensive network of connections in the drug trade. Their leader, Donato Salernitano, was a young, ambitious, and fiercely determined man, eager to make his mark on the Roman underworld, to establish his family as the dominant force. Salernitano saw the Benedettis as weakened, vulnerable, ripe for the taking. He began to encroach on their territories, to undermine their businesses, to challenge their authority. He sent veiled threats, made subtle moves, testing Dario's resolve, probing his defenses, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Dario, still reeling from the emotional turmoil of confronting his past, was reluctant to engage in another conflict, another cycle of violence, another bloody feud. He had seen enough bloodshed, had experienced enough loss, had tasted the bitterness of revenge. He wanted peace, stability, a chance to build a new future, a future free from the constant threat of violence. But Alessandra, ever the strategist, ever the protector, saw the danger that Salernitano posed. She knew that they could not afford to be passive, that they had to respond, that they had to defend their position, their family, their future. She urged Dario to take action, to confront Salernitano, to show him that the Benedettis were not weak, that they were not to be trifled with. "We cannot let him walk all over us, Dario," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "We have to fight back." Dario hesitated, his reluctance evident in his eyes, in his voice, in his body language. "I don't want another war, Alessandra," he said, his voice weary, his spirit exhausted. "I'm tired of the violence." "I know, Dario," she said softly, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "But we have no choice. We have to protect ourselves, to protect our family, to protect our future." She proposed a different approach, a strategy that did not involve direct confrontation, a plan that relied on cunning, on intelligence, on alliances. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," she said, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of determination and a touch of mischief. She suggested reaching out to other families who had also been threatened by Salernitano's ambition, families who had a vested interest in maintaining the balance of power, families who were willing to join forces with the Benedettis to counter the Salernitano threat. Dario, initially skeptical, began to see the wisdom of her plan. It was a risky strategy, a delicate dance of alliances and betrayals, but it was also a way to avoid a direct confrontation, a way to minimize the bloodshed, a way to protect his family, his people, his future. They began to reach out to other families, secretly, discreetly, using Don Angelo as a mediator, as a go-between, as a guarantor of trust. They met with the leaders of these families, in hidden locations, in the dead of night, forging alliances, making deals, building a coalition of forces to counter the Salernitano threat. It was a dangerous game, a complex web of relationships and rivalries, but Alessandra, with her keen intelligence, her sharp intuition, her unwavering determination, navigated the treacherous waters of the Roman underworld with skill and grace. She became the architect of their strategy, the mastermind behind their plan, the driving force behind their resistance. Dario, initially reluctant, began to rely on her, to trust her judgment, to admire her strength, her courage, her unwavering loyalty. The alliance they forged was a fragile one, a coalition of convenience, a temporary truce between rivals, but it was enough to deter Salernitano, to force him to reconsider his plans, to make him realize that the Benedettis were not as weak as he had thought, that they were not alone, that they had allies, that they were willing to fight back. The threat from the Salernitanos was neutralized, not through violence, but through strategy, through cunning, through alliances. It was a victory for Alessandra, a testament to her intelligence, her resourcefulness, her unwavering determination. It was also a victory for Dario, a confirmation of his trust in her, a validation of his decision to embrace a new path, a path of peace, of diplomacy, of strategic alliances. The enemy of my enemy had become their friend, and in that unlikely alliance, they had found a way to protect themselves, to secure their future, to build a new world, a world where violence was not the only answer, where diplomacy could prevail, where love and loyalty could triumph over hatred and betrayal. The strategy also allowed for Dario to see a strength in Alessandra beyond her beauty and compassion, a strength that was complementary to his own, a strength that made them a formidable team. Chapter 18. Shattered Illusions, New Beginnings. The successful maneuvering against Salernitano solidified Dario and Alessandra's position, not just within the Roman underworld, but within their own relationship. They had proven their ability to work together, to trust each other, to rely on each other's strengths. But the constant threat of violence, the ever-present dangers of their world, continued to weigh heavily on Dario. He had tasted peace, had glimpsed a different future, and he yearned for it desperately. One evening, as they sat on the terrace of the Palazzo Benedetti, overlooking the twinkling lights of Rome, Dario turned to Alessandra, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and a profound sadness. "I don't want this life anymore, Alessandra," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm tired of the violence, the fear, the constant threat. I want something more, something different." Alessandra had known this moment was coming. She had seen the change in him, the growing weariness, the yearning for a life beyond the shadows of his family's legacy. "What do you want, Dario?" she asked softly, her hand reaching out to take his. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, seeking reassurance, seeking understanding, seeking permission. "I want to leave," he said, his voice hesitant, his gaze dropping to their intertwined fingers.
To leave Rome, to leave the family, to start a new life. With you.
Alessandra's heart skipped a beat. It was the moment she had dreamed of, the possibility she had dared to hope for, but it was also a terrifying prospect, a leap of faith into the unknown, a severing of ties with everything he had ever known. "Are you sure, Dario?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. It's a big decision. A dangerous decision." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers, his gaze firm with conviction. I'm sure, Alessandra. More sure than I've ever been of anything in my life. I want a life with you. A life of peace, of happiness, of normalcy. The illusion of the impenetrable, all-powerful capo had shattered, replaced by the reality of a man yearning for a different life, a life free from the burdens of his past, a life filled with love and peace and simple joys. They began to plan their escape, secretly, meticulously, knowing that it would be a dangerous undertaking, a betrayal of his family, a violation of the code, a risk that could cost them their lives. They decided to leave Italy, to start a new life in a different country, under new identities, far from the reach of the Roman underworld, far from the shadows of their past. Alessandra used her contacts in the art world to acquire forged passports, to arrange for transportation, to find a safe haven, a place where they could disappear, where they could start anew. Dario, using his knowledge of the family's finances, began to transfer funds, to liquidate assets, to prepare for their departure, to ensure that they would have the resources they needed to build a new life. It was a delicate dance of deception, a carefully orchestrated plan, a race against time, a gamble with their lives. They told no one, not even their closest confidants, knowing that any leak, any betrayal, could be fatal. The night of their departure arrived, a moonless night, shrouded in darkness, mirroring the uncertainty of their future, the risks they were taking, the leap of faith they were about to make. They packed their belongings, a few precious mementos, a few reminders of their past, a few symbols of their love. As they stood in the grand hall of the Palazzo Benedetti, ready to leave, Dario turned to Alessandra, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and a profound sense of relief. I'm leaving everything behind, Alessandra, he said, his voice husky with emotion. My family, my legacy, my life. But you're taking the most important thing with you, Dario, she said softly, her hand reaching out to cup his face. You're taking me, and I'm taking you. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. It was a kiss of farewell, a kiss of goodbye to the past, a kiss of hello to the future, a kiss of a love that had defied the odds, that had conquered the darkness, that had emerged triumphant. They slipped out of the palazzo unnoticed, disappearing into the night, leaving behind their old lives, their old identities, their old burdens. They were embarking on a new journey, a new adventure, a new beginning. They were shedding their illusions, embracing their realities, forging a new path, a path towards freedom, towards peace, towards a future filled with love and hope and the promise of a life beyond the shadows. The shattered illusions were not a loss, but a liberation, a freeing from the constraints of the past, a paving of the way for a future built on honesty, on trust, on a love that had been tested and proven true. It was a new beginning, not just for them, but for the possibility of a life beyond the confines of their predetermined roles, a life chosen, not inherited. Chapter 19. The Heart's True Allegiance. Their escape led them to a small, secluded village in the south of France, a place of sun-drenched vineyards, rolling hills, and a tranquil atmosphere that was a world away from the chaos and violence of Rome. They adopted new names, Mr. and Mrs. Rossi, a tribute to Dario's grandmother and a symbol of their new beginning, their shedding of the Benedetti legacy. They bought a small, charming villa overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, a place filled with light, with warmth, with the scent of lavender and rosemary. They furnished it simply, with comfortable furniture, with local art, with objects that spoke of their new life, of their shared love, of their freedom. Alessandra resumed her work as an art restorer, finding clients in the nearby towns and villages, her skills and reputation preceding her, even under her assumed name. She found joy in her work, in the beauty she brought to life, in the sense of purpose and fulfillment it gave her. Dario, freed from the burdens of his past, discovered a new passion, a new talent, a new way of life. He learned to cultivate the land, to grow grapes, to make wine. He found solace in the rhythm of nature, in the connection to the earth, in the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and tangible with his own hands. They lived a simple life, a quiet life, a life filled with love, with laughter, with the simple joys of everyday existence. They made friends with their neighbors, became part of the community, embraced their new identities, their new reality. But the past, like a persistent echo, continued to reverberate, casting occasional shadows over their newfound happiness. They received news from Rome, whispers of the turmoil that had followed their departure, of the power struggles within the Benedetti family, of the ongoing search for them, of the threats that still lingered. Lorenzo, Dario's younger brother, had assumed control of the family, reluctantly, hesitantly, guided by Don Angelo, trying to steer the Benedettis towards a more legitimate path, away from the violence and corruption of the past. But he was facing challenges, opposition, threats from rival families, from disgruntled members of his own family, who resented his leadership, who yearned for the old ways, who blamed Dario for their weakened position. One day, they received a visit from Sofia, Alessandra's cousin and confidant, the one person who knew their secret, the one person they trusted implicitly. Sofia brought news from Rome, news of Lorenzo's struggles, of the threats he faced, of the danger he was in. She also brought a plea, a request, a desperate appeal for help. "Lorenzo, he needs you." "Dario," Sofia said, her voice trembling with emotion. He's in danger. The family, it's falling apart. They need your guidance. Your strength." Dario was torn. He had turned his back on that life, had vowed to leave it behind, had embraced a new future, a future of peace, of happiness, of freedom. But he also felt a responsibility, a loyalty, a sense of obligation to his brother, to his family, to the legacy he had inherited, even though he had chosen to reject it. Alessandra saw the conflict in his eyes, the turmoil in his soul, the struggle between his desire for peace and his sense of duty. "It's your decision, Dario," she said softly, her hand reaching out to take his. "I will support you, whatever you decide." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and a profound love. He knew that she would stand by him, no matter what, that she would follow him to the ends of the earth, that she would share his burdens, that she would be his strength, his anchor, his guiding light. He made his decision. He could not abandon his brother, could not turn his back on his family, could not ignore the call of duty, the pull of loyalty, the weight of his legacy. "I have to go back, Alessandra," he said, his voice firm with conviction, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. "I have to help Lorenzo.
To save the family."
Alessandra nodded, her heart aching for him, for the sacrifice he was making, for the peace he was giving up, for the danger he was facing. "Then we'll go back together," she said, her voice unwavering, her love a shield against the fear, a beacon of hope in the midst of the uncertainty. Their heart's true allegiance was not to a place, not to a name, not to a legacy, but to each other, and to the bonds of family, however strained, however tested. They would return to Rome, not as fugitives, but as partners, as allies, as a force to be reckoned with. They would face the dangers together, would fight for their family, would strive to build a better future, a future where peace and justice could prevail, where love and loyalty could triumph over violence and betrayal. The decision was not a return to the past, but a forging of a new future, a reclaiming of their heritage, but on their own terms, guided by their own values, their own love, their own unwavering commitment to each other. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Their return to Rome was shrouded in secrecy. They arrived under the cover of darkness, using their network of contacts to slip back into the city unnoticed, to avoid the watchful eyes of their enemies, to protect themselves from the threats that still lingered. They met with Lorenzo in a hidden location, a safe house known only to a select few. Lorenzo was relieved to see them, his face etched with worry and exhaustion, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and a touch of resentment. "Dario, I didn't know where else to turn," Lorenzo said, his voice trembling with emotion. "The family, it's tearing itself apart. The Salernitanos, they're making their move. I don't know what to do." Dario embraced his brother, a gesture of reassurance, of support, of a bond that had been tested but not broken. I'm here, Lorenzo, Dario said, his voice firm with conviction. We'll face this together. Alessandra, ever the strategist, quickly assessed the situation, analyzing the threats, identifying the weaknesses, formulating a plan. She proposed a bold move, a daring strategy that would involve confronting the Salernitanos directly, exposing their vulnerabilities, and uniting the remaining families against them. It was a risky plan, a dangerous gamble, but it was also the only way to save the Benedetti family, to restore peace to the Roman underworld, to build a future free from the constant threat of violence. Dario, guided by Alessandra's wisdom and fueled by his renewed sense of purpose, agreed to the plan. He knew that it was a fight for survival, a battle for the soul of his family, a confrontation that would determine their future. They reached out to Don Angelo, the elder statesman, the respected mediator, the keeper of the peace. They presented him with their plan, with their evidence of the Salernitanos' aggression, with their strategy for uniting the families against them. Don Angelo, initially skeptical, began to see the wisdom of their approach. He recognized the danger that the Salernitanos posed, the threat to the stability of the Roman underworld, the potential for a bloody, all-out war. He agreed to support them, to use his influence, his authority, his network of contacts to rally the other families, to forge a united front against the Salernitanos. The final confrontation took place at a neutral location, a grand villa outside of Rome, a place where generations of conflicts had been resolved, where treaties had been signed, where the fate of the Roman underworld had been decided. The leaders of all the major families were present, their faces grim, their eyes watchful, their hands never far from their weapons. The atmosphere was tense, charged with an undercurrent of violence, the air thick with anticipation, with fear, with the weight of history. Dario and Alessandra, standing side by side, presented their case, their evidence, their plan. They spoke with passion, with conviction, with a clarity of purpose that resonated with the assembled leaders. Donato Salernitano, arrogant and defiant, denied the accusations, challenged their authority, threatened their lives. He believed he was invincible, that his power was unassailable, that he could crush the Benedettis and seize control of the Roman underworld. But he had underestimated Dario, had underestimated Alessandra, had underestimated the power of their alliance, the strength of their resolve, the depth of their love. Don Angelo, acting as the judge, the arbiter, the voice of reason, presented the evidence, the irrefutable proof of Salernitano's treachery, his violations of the code, his aggression against the Benedettis, his threat to the stability of the Roman underworld. The assembled leaders, swayed by the evidence, by Don Angelo's authority, by Dario and Alessandra's passionate plea, turned against Salernitano. They condemned his actions, stripped him of his power, banished him from Rome, ending his reign of terror, crushing his ambition, extinguishing his threat. The final confrontation was not a battle of bullets, but a battle of hearts and minds, a clash of loyalties and betrayals, a triumph of strategy and diplomacy over brute force. It was a victory for Dario and Alessandra, a testament to their courage, their intelligence, their unwavering love. The Roman underworld was once again at peace, the balance of power restored, the threat of war averted. The Benedetti family, under Dario's leadership, guided by Alessandra's wisdom, had emerged stronger, more united, more respected than ever before. Dario and Alessandra, their mission accomplished, their family secured, their future assured, returned to their villa in the south of France, to their quiet life, to their simple joys, to their enduring love. They had faced the final confrontation, had conquered their fears, had overcome their challenges, had emerged victorious. Their heart's true allegiance had been tested, and it had proven true, unwavering, unbreakable. The confrontation was not an ending, but a new beginning, a reaffirmation of their love, a strengthening of their bond, a promise of a future filled with peace, with happiness, with a freedom that had been hard-earned and deeply cherished. They chose to leave again, the pull of their peaceful life stronger than any sense of obligation. They had done what they needed, and now they returned to their chosen life.
Epilogue.
Years passed, filled with the quiet rhythm of their life in the French countryside. The sun-drenched vineyards, the rolling hills, the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean became the backdrop of their enduring love, their peaceful existence, their hard-won freedom. Alessandra continued her work as an art restorer, her reputation growing, her skills sought after by collectors and museums around the world. She found joy in her work, in the beauty she brought to life, in the sense of purpose and fulfillment it gave her. She had created a small studio in the villa, filled with light and the scent of oil paints, a sanctuary where she could lose herself in her art, where she could express her creativity, where she could find solace and inspiration. Dario, fully embracing his new life, became a respected vintner, his wines renowned for their quality, their complexity, their unique character. He found peace in the rhythm of nature, in the connection to the earth, in the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and tangible with his own hands. He expanded the vineyards, built a modern winery, his passion for his craft evident in every bottle, in every glass, in every sip. They often sat on their terrace, overlooking the vineyards, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant hues of orange and purple, their hands intertwined, their hearts filled with a love that had deepened with time, that had weathered the storms, that had emerged stronger, more resilient, more profound. They received occasional visits from Sofia, from Lorenzo, who had successfully steered the Benedetti family towards a more legitimate path, away from the violence and corruption of the past. Lorenzo had married, had children, had found happiness in his own life, a happiness that had been made possible by Dario and Alessandra's sacrifices, by their courage, by their love. The whispers of their past, the echoes of the Roman underworld, faded with time, replaced by the sounds of laughter, of shared meals, of quiet conversations, of the simple joys of everyday existence. One evening, as they celebrated their anniversary, Dario raised his glass to Alessandra, his eyes filled with a love that was both tender and unwavering. "To us, Dolcezza," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "To our love, to our freedom, to our new beginning." Alessandra smiled, her heart overflowing with gratitude, with joy, with a love that had defied the odds, that had conquered the darkness, that had emerged triumphant. "To us," she replied, her voice echoing his sentiment, her eyes reflecting the depth of her love, the unwavering commitment, the enduring bond that had been forged in fire, that had been tested by adversity, that had stood the test of time. They had found their paradise, not in a faraway land, not in a life of luxury, but in each other's arms, in their shared love, in their peaceful existence, in their hard-won freedom. They had built a new world, a world of beauty, of tranquility, of enduring love, a world where the shadows of the past had been dispelled, where the wounds had healed, where happiness reigned supreme. They lived out their days in peace, surrounded by beauty, by love, by the quiet joy of a life well lived, a life chosen, a life earned, a life shared. Their story was a testament to the power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, the possibility of redemption, the enduring hope for a better future. It was a story of a reluctant bride who had found her strength, her voice, her freedom, and a powerful capo who had found his heart, his peace, his true love. And in finding each other, they had found everything. The end.